Thank you for this time that you're sharing the story of your uncle.
Well, it's been a long journey, and I look forward to sharing it with you.
Well, it's a blessing for me, and I do really appreciate your time and effort in doing this.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to hear about it.
Well, I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my journey to find out a little bit about my Uncle Ross. This is a picture of him taken about in 1944. I didn't have this picture originally, but I'm here to tell you a little bit about how I came into possession of it. My Uncle Ross, I never knew him. He passed away November the 4th, 1944. It was during World War II. And his plane, he flew a B-17 plane, and he was a bombardier, and he was missing in action. And so it was long before I was born. So I wanted to know a little bit about who he was, what his dreams were, what his hopes were, a little bit about his life. And that's my journey, my family history that I'm here to tell you a little bit about today. About 10 years ago, my father was approaching 90, and he asked me to come visit him. And when I came to visit, he handed me 4 cardboard boxes full of genealogy, dates and places and birth certificates and death certificates that he had collected over half his lifetime. And he said, "This is part of your inheritance." I was sort of overwhelmed. He says it doesn't have a lot of monetary value, but it's worth its weight in gold. And so as I searched who my uncle was, because I never knew him, I only had dates and places. I did find in my baby book that my mother kept for me some newspaper articles. And in these articles, it said, Lieutenant McCollum, missing in action. These came out shortly after November the 4th, 1944, where his plane, a B-17, went down in the North Sea, which is right off the coast of the Netherlands. He was based in England, and he flew out of England with a crew of 9 people and to defend our country. I'd like to tell you 2 stories about how I collected information, because all I had was dates and places. I was really interested in the stories behind those dates. So the first story I'd like to tell you is about an article that was written in Time magazine. It was written by Tom Brokaw, who was a journalist for NBC. And in 2000, he wrote an article. It was called Last Letters Home. And unbeknownst to me, my father had written him and included a letter of my uncle. And this is the article that was included there, and a picture of my uncle. Now, I didn't have that picture, nor did my father. He got that from his other brother, who also fought in the war, but he collected a lot of things. And so he had a picture, which he loaned my father, which he sent off to Time magazine. I'd like to read just a little bit about the letter that was written. And this was the last letter received home before my uncle passed away. Now, my father was called Bud, and so it said, the letter says, "Dear Bud, glad to receive your letter telling about home. Bet the old place looks good, even though it's getting a little worn. Sure wish I could get back to see it soon. We gotta help with this darn war over here first. The more I fly and drop bombs, the more I know this darn foolish war isn't what it's cracked up to be. I don't know whether Mom wrote or told you about my experience or not, so I'll tell you here, supposing she never. We're on a bombing mission to the But we went up, and we were up to no good. Also, it wasn't a nice day. We were up in the air about 5 miles, minding our own business. And just then, as we were flying over Germany, going on our bombing run, some sad character on the ground decided to try out his new flak gun. He fired the thing a few times, and then others joined in, and they shot out 2 of our 4 engines. Everything was fine, save that we were deep in the heart of Germany, with only 2 engines, and had lost our formation because we couldn't stay up with them. And we were sweating out the enemy fighters. 4 of our fighters, escorts, felt sorry for us, and they watched over us for the Luftwaffe overhead. Gee, they look beautiful. Well, to help make a long story short, we lost another engine over enemy territory and had a choice of bailing out over Germany and becoming POWs or sticking with the plane to the border. We stuck with the plane and bailed out over the front lines. On the ground, we got a great reception from the Belgians. They found us out that we were Americans and not German paratroopers. We were back flying again. We had to make our way through the underground to the coast and then take a fishing boat back over to England, where we got another plane. We've been flying for some time. I may finish up here in a few dozen more missions. If someone feels sorry for me, might write more about what you're doing at home. I know you just had a couple of weeks from your own stay out in the Navy, but I really appreciate you watching out for Mom. Got to get some sack time, so I'll have to close now. Love, Ross. His last letter home. Now, I didn't have much more about my uncle. I looked through all my father's genealogy, and there wasn't really a lot, but just dates and places. My dad never talked about his brother, and my grandma didn't talk about her son. It was hard. Of the 3 boys serving in the war, my uncle was the only one that never came home. But a few years ago, I came home and got a letter in the mail. It was addressed to me. It was from somebody in Washington. His name was Mark Johnson. I didn't know a Mark Johnson in Washington. And so I anxiously opened up the letter, and inside was a letter saying, "Are you related to Ross Marshel McCollum, who died in World War II?" I wrote back. He didn't give me his email, so I wrote back. There's no phone number. And I said, yes, he was my uncle. I'm named after him. And he wrote back with an envelope addressed to me. And inside were some pictures. There was this picture, which I had blown up. But inside was a picture of his graduation from Bombardier School in New Mexico. Inside it said, "Lived across the street in El Monte, killed in World War II." It was addressed to Eileen with love, Ross McCollum. Who was Eileen? It was Mark Johnson's mother. She had just passed away. She was in her 70s. No, she was in her 90s. And she had just passed away. And he found in the bottom of one of her trunks this picture, along with high school picture of my uncle, and a letter that my Uncle Ross had written his mom. I assume they were boyfriend, girlfriend. My uncle never married. After he went into the war and was transferred over to England, he never came home again. The letter reads, "Dear Eileen, gosh, it was swell to hear from you." Then there's a lot of boy-girl talk. And it ends with, "All my love, Ross." So I'm piecing together a story of a young man who graduated from high school, who lived across the street from Eileen. Eileen and he must have meant something to each other because she kept his letter and his picture. Without this picture, I would not know what my uncle looked like. And so I was excited to have these little pieces of memorabilia of knowing who everyone was. I was also excited after I had called Mark Johnson and told him how appreciative I was of him sending this material. And he says, "You know what? My mother's brother is still alive. He's 90 something and he lives in New York. If you want, I can give you his phone number." So I got his phone number and I called him up. And a woman answered. It was his daughter. And I said, "Well, I'm Ross McCollum and I'm calling Pat Grady, Eileen's brother." And she said, "Well, let me get him." And he came on the line and he didn't say anything. I said, "Pat, this is Ross McCollum. Ross McCollum from California." And he stammered a little bit and he said, "I'm a good Catholic boy and I thought you were a ghost." He said, your uncle and I were best of friends. We were seniors in high school. We wrote on the the high school annual. I did the writing and your uncle did the cartoons, which were included in there. And I found out from him that my uncle worked for Walt Disney as an intern before the war. And because of his artistic talents, the school put him to work drawing cartoons for the high school annual. Pat Grady sent me a copy of their high school annual, and I was able to make copies of that, and it's a cherished memory that I have. A few months later, Pat passed away. So the timing was perfect to find out a little bit more about my uncle. He had 2 years of college, was an intern, and was a budding artist. I found out from Mark Johnson that maybe my uncle and his mom were boyfriend-girlfriend. And so I was just excited to learn a little bit more about this story. And so even though I love genealogy, I love the dates, I love the history, but I think what I love most is the stories that go along with that. So hopefully today, these couple of stories will inspire you to never give up. Don't settle for the dates. Don't settle for the locations. Go for the stories. Find out what is behind those dates and who these people are, because I truly believe that our ancestors have made who we are today and what we are. And so today, my Uncle Ross, I'm named after him. My first name is Ross. I named my youngest son, and middle name is Ross. And my other son named his son, my grandson, middle name of Ross. So there's 4 generations of Rosses that are floating out there. And hopefully the letter that I read, my uncle was willing to give up his life for you and I so that we could live in freedom in this country.